Hello and welcome to this video from Dazatron's Diorama Llama. This is not my usual type of video. Don't worry, I'm not changing the channel. This is still going to be a diorama tutorial channel for beginners. But in this video I wanted to review a figure that I picked up recently. Now this figure is from a line of figures that are called Micronauts, which also come from the Microman Japanese line. So it's a very humble collection, it's a very small collection at the moment. As those of you know who've watched my videos before, I predominantly collect Transformers, and that's because that reminds me of my childhood. They were my favourite toys growing up. But I do have to say, for some reason, this kind of line passed me by. I mean, it originates in the 60s and predominantly in the 70s, spans 4 decades, and yet somehow I never got to play with any of these as a kid, but I would have absolutely loved them. And so I'm creating this video not because there's not lots of content on Micronauts or Microman. There already is. You can find lots of channels already. But this figure here, this is a figure I picked up just last week, and it's called Red Falcon, and this is the black and red variant. There are actually many other variants, and the original is kind of like a blue, red and silver kind of colour scheme, which comes from the Micronauts line, which are these ones here. So just before I go back to this guy, I just need to give you a bit of history behind how this even got here. So moving back to Micronauts. So Micronauts was a line that came from another line, but from Japan, called Microman. So Microman, and again, you can find other videos that go into this in a lot more detail. I do recommend Toy Galaxy's video on the Micronauts, and also the Toys That Made Us Netflix show is a good place to look at, in particularly the Transformers video, because that would talk about Microman. So Microman, which are these little figures here, these came from the G.I. Joe line. So let me just explain that in a bit more detail. So Takara, who made Transformers, along with Hasbro, they got the rights to distribute G.I. Joe in Japan. Except of course G.I. Joe has a military theme to it, and they wanted to adapt that theme to their own audiences. So they created something called Henshin Cyborg, which were kind of like larger versions of these, really. Kind of clear plastic. You could see the kind of the workings on the insides. You could kind of pull off the heads, if I remember right, and they had this kind of modular system where you could kind of add things onto them. But these were G.I. Joe size, and actually there was an oil crisis where the price of oil went up in the late 60s, I think it was. It might have been the early 70s. And so companies that were making plastic toys, don't forget Japan had a long history of tin toys and had moved to plastic. They now had to rethink what they were doing because it was costing so much money to make these large figures. So Takara came up with a genius idea of just shrinking down their figures. So rather than the larger G.I. Joe size figures, they came up with these kind of 3.5 inch, I think they are. Let's just put it next to another figure here. These mini figures. And the idea that these micro men, they are from another planet, and when they came to Earth, they disguised themselves as these action figures. So when you own one of these, you've got a real live alien in your house, which I can imagine as a kid would have been really, really cool to think about that. But of course, they did brilliantly. You know, they sold really, really well in Japan. And so Mego decided to, you know, get the rights to distribute them in America. And they took a lot of the original molds, like these little time travelers, they're called here. And there's different variations on these, so there's different kind of coloured plastics. But one of the really cool things about this, don't forget this is from the 70s, is the articulation. I mean, the articulation on these guys is immense. There's just so much to it. I mean, think back even to kind of some of my kind of G1 Transformer toys, you know, which sometimes are like kind of just blocks. They have very little articulation. These guys had everything. I mean, they've got little kind of torso kind of rockers. You know, think about a lot of the toys that we get now where we're looking for little things like that, and you can kind of turn the waist as well. So there we go. So that's mad. I mean, this is from the 70s, which is, you know, amazing. So their articulation was incredible, really, for their time. So they were well ahead of their time in regards to toys. So yeah, Mego started to distribute these to America, and they, you know, sales rocketed. They did really, really well. I only have this vehicle here, and I do forget its name. One of the cool things about this was that it's got a periscope, so you can actually look through the back there. You can kind of see what's on the top for these kind of mirrors. You can just kind of see my finger coming through there, so there's a nice little feature on that. And they all had these kind of little gimmicks. But again, just like the toys that you could kind of pull things off and add to them, you could do the same with the vehicles here. So I'm just going to pull that off. And so as you started to collect more and more of the vehicles, you could kind of attach and detach and reattach different parts to come up with your own kind of cool vehicle designs.
Biatron and hydrocopter need assembly. All have interchangeable parts. A few changes and hydrocopter is a paddle boat or a one-man cruiser. You can combine it with Biatron and build your own toy, like these. Batteries for Biatron and hydrocopter not included. Hydrocopter, Biatron, and Space Glider, all sold separately by Mego.
And that's one of the things that's really kind of drawn me into this line that I didn't know much about, and certainly bypassed me as a child, is this playability value. And for me, that's one of the things that's brought me back into toys, is not just having them on the shelf and having them looking pretty, which, yeah, that's a big part of what I do. That's why I make the dioramas, is so you can kind of, again, put your figure into a situation, and I just think they look really cool like that. But I just love toys that you can play with. And I suppose that's why I was drawn to Transformers, and that's what I loved about Transformers as a kid. So this Microman Micronauts line really appeals to me. So this was one of the first kind of toys that I picked up in this line from Ace Models in Birmingham, in Erdington. So I'm from the UK, as I'm sure you're aware. So yeah, if you do see Ace Models, it's worth popping in. They've got a fantastic range of toys. And then from that, I kind of did a bit of research, and there's characters like Baron Karza, who was from the Mego line, and who looks a little bit like this here, but kind of all in black and has a different kind of head sculpt. But that then led me here, and what I loved about this design, this character is from, or designed by a very famous, kind of like a godfather of anime really, called Go Nagai. And you might, if you are kind of my kind of age, you might know him as he created the series Starfleet, or X-Bomber as it was known in Japan. And I absolutely loved Starfleet as a kid, which was like a marionette show, a bit like Thunderbirds. And so he was also responsible really for super robots. So, you know, Go Nagai was like one of the first manga artists to create these super robots, and you can see this guy here who's called Katatsu Jig, which is Steel Jig, translated over here. And he was this kind of big mecha, and the pilots would kind of, if I remember right, they go inside the head. So, you know, you can imagine how big this guy would be. So they would kind of pilot the head. And what would happen in the show, and I've only seen some of the later shows, is that they would kind of shoot different parts of him. So if I just kind of pull this off here, you can see he's just fired off his hand there. Don't worry, his hand isn't broken. That's part of the gimmick, is that, in fact, let me just do that. See if I try not to lose a hand. There we go. And the hand disappears. I'll find that later. But one of the gimmicks, or I suppose the ideas from the show, is that he gets built. So they kind of shoot these different parts, and then the character kind of builds up, and it becomes this big kind of giant weapon, giant robot that it can use to obviously fight the bad guys. And he's got these kind of big kind of drill bit type things on the back there. And so I remember seeing pictures of this guy and some of Nagai's other giant robots, you know, years ago, because I'm into anime and manga, and in particular giant robots, again linking back to Transformers. So it was almost like a full circle thing that Takara, who made Transformers, also made this toy. Now this is the re-release, so this is from the 1990s. The original was from the early 70s. Actually, I think it was 75, if I remember right, the original version. And if I show you the box here, you can see that's kind of the original colour scheme. And I managed to find this clear version, which is the Takara re-release in the late 90s. And I just loved it. I do like clear plastic. And I just thought that looked so cool. But these were from the Microman line. So again, going back to this little guy down here. And these were called Microman Titans. So then when Mego took the rights, they never released Steel Jig, because again, I suppose they would need the rights from, you know, Nagagai and all that kind of stuff, I would imagine. But they took the mould, and they did a black version and a white version with a different head sculpt. And they released that in the Micronauts line. So that's where we lead up to Micronauts. So I do remember Micronauts actually vaguely as a kid collecting comics. Do remember the toys, but I remember the comic. I remember seeing the Marvel comic kind of in comic book stores. So I do, you know, have a recollection of that. But just never saw the toys. So I picked up this clear version of Steel Jig, which I absolutely love. And if I just draw your attention to this instruction booklet here, because I just think it's ace. I think that just looks so cool. And it shows you like the different variations, so you can kind of swap the different parts around, like the rockets and the drill bits, put them on his legs so you can kind of drill into the ground, which is really cool. You can put these also, if I just pull that off. There we go. And pull those off here. There we go. And so we can pull his arm off. And then we've got this kind of, this magnetic ball, which is the system here. And we can kind of add those in. So we can have them coming off his torso like that, like a big kind of weapon, which is really cool. or you can even pull off these drill bits and add them onto the arm in place of the fist. So let me just see if I can do that when I'm on camera. So push that into here. There we go. And then you can fire those as well, which is really cool. Let's just have a quick look at that. There we go. Brilliant. So there's so much fun to be had with these. So I love that booklet that you get with that. If I just turn it over, you get some really cool artwork there. Look, just showing all the insides of steel jig, which just looks so cool. So I love that, okay, and that's what got me looking then at other variations that used this kind of mould. And that led me to Red Falcon. Now the original Red Falcon, in fact, let me just see if you can see that there. I'm not going to open up this box, but that was the original character. So it's kind of silver, blue and red. His red rings, and he was kind of like a it looks quite silver there. He's like a pale blue colour, with his kind of really bright yellow eyes, and just looked great, looked really good. But quite hard to find and very expensive from the Micronauts line. But as Micronauts started to die out, other companies picked up the rights and tried to relaunch them with varying degrees of success. And the last one to do so was Palisade Toys. Okay, now I do have some Palisade toys, and they did a line on the Muppets, and I do remember picking up a few of them when I was in my old collecting days as a teenager. So I do remember the company, and they tried to relaunch Micronauts, which, you know, the fans were, you know, loving the idea of it being relaunched in the late 90s. But unfortunately, they didn't have the original molds, so they had to kind of reach out to the fan base and the kind of collecting community, and some generous volunteers gave up some of their kind of beloved toys so they could be used to make molds. So that Palisade Toys could relaunch this line and do kind of colour variants and add other things, I suppose, would be the idea. But unfortunately, they used a cheaper factory in Japan, which was using, you know, substandard materials, and so there was lots of QC issues, and so the relaunch didn't go down very well. I think the fans liked it, but because of the QC issues, he wasn't being picked up by the general public, and he wasn't really creating a big new kind of fan base. But they kind of, you know, they continued with it, and thankfully this one here is from season 2 or series 2 of the toy line. They did do a 1.5 as well, and thankfully they moved to a different factory, used better quality materials. And so I'm not too worried actually about this clear plastic. I know clear plastic can be brittle, but already this guy has fallen off its display shelf, and there's no cracks, there's no damage, so that does give me hope that it's going to be okay with this. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. I haven't seen another YouTube video of this guy. I've seen the original from the Micronauts line, but not the red and black variant. And so I just wanted to take this opportunity really to share this guy with the rest of the world, and to share, you know, the figures in this kind of new collection, which might give you or might inspire you to have a look at this line, because I just think they're fantastic. So before I come back to Red Falcon and just go into it in a bit more detail, just show you some of the few other bits I've got. So this one here is called Hurricane Bird. Let me just move some of these bits out of the way, just so we can see what we're doing. Now I picked this up for a £5, from eBay, because it's not the whole thing. You can see it's got one wing. It's got this bit here, which is not meant to be a body. It's meant to be a leg part. So it's missing all of its body. It's only got one claw. So it's missing the claw, but it's got the head. But even so, you know, because of the modular system, where you can kind of, you've got these little magnets, you can still turn it into something pretty cool. And I quite like that. In fact, I can even get a little Microman here, or Micronaut, and he will kind of sit on top of him, and he can kind of be riding him, which is really, really cool. So I am looking out for the other parts for the Hurricane Bird. Okay, but then we're moving on to here. So this again was part of the re-release from Takara in Japan, and these are called Acrobots, if I remember right. And this was a free pack. I think they did release them separately, but they also released them as a free pack. I do know the one at the top there is Vampire. I don't know the names of the other two. But you've got this kind of weird kind of lizard, crocodile kind of creature. Again, it's got a nice kind of clear head. You can kind of move the parts. And again, it's the same system, so you can kind of pull off different bits and attach them elsewhere. So you've got this kind of beetle guy here, who's now got this lizard arm. So you've got his robotic head, and then you've got this kind of beetle head there, which is really cool. And you got this guy, and the top half of that is the vampire, and then he's got these kind of legs from one of the other creatures here. And he's also got two wings, which you can kind of pull out and attach elsewhere, which is fantastic. Another cool feature on this is it's got this kind of little chest plate bit here, which kind of opens and closes. And you can also pull, whoops, sorry, that's meant to happen. You can also pull this bit out, and actually I can pull that out and put the Microman inside there as well, which is really, really cool. So there's just so much fun that you can have with these, where you can pull bits off and reassemble them in a whole variety of ways, which I just love. I just think is fantastic. So that's why, you know, I like this line. So back to Red Falcon and this black and red variant. So here is Red Falcon in his kind of humanoid mode. As you can see, he's a stunning looking figure. I mean, just look at that detail in the torso with the clear plastic and the kind of, you know, almost like a kind of a circuit board type thing going on there, which is great. So we've got the clear red plastic. There are other variations of this. So there's I think it's a green and gold one. Of course, you've got the original colour scheme, which is the blue and red. And then there's actually a very rare, completely clear version with some kind of gold accents. And that was a special gift set that Pallisades put out. But apparently there was only 50 made. So if you've managed to get hold of one of those, that's one of the rarest of the kind of Micronauts items that are for sale. So yeah, do look out for the all clear version. But I still think this red and black one looks really cool and actually makes him look a lot more menacing than the original. I don't know a huge amount of the lore around the the Micronauts world. I never read or collected the comic, but I do know this guy was a commander. I think he was promoted to a general by Baron Karza, and he was given a mission to rescue. I think it was the daughter of the Emperor, something like that. I don't know if I got that right. So I think he was actually a bad guy, because you've got the Micronauts and then they've got the Acro Year, and the Acro Year were the enemy of the Micronauts. So so I don't know. So yes, I'm not sure if he's a bit of both or what, but I think he looks more menacing in this colour scheme. And one thing I would say, that is a little bit of a negative, is that you can kind of see where the eyes aren't painted. So it's like a piece of yellow plastic that they've placed, almost like a band that's placed inside the head. And obviously because the head is translucent red plastic, you can kind of see that yellow band. So I'm not so keen on that, although I do like the yellow eyes. And I must admit though, on the shelf you don't really notice that much. It just looks really cool. So just looking at the back here, so you got those wings, almost these kind of heel spur type things, just to kind of give him some balance and stability. And then you got the yellow translucent missiles there. It comes with this cool sword, and I've added some stickers onto that come with him. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with all of his stickers that the original came with. So if I just bring in the head section of the bird, kind of plain mode that you could put him into, the original and there we go, the original, I don't know if it has a sticker here for the eyes or the eyes are painted in, and there's other stickers as well on this part here. So that is one of the differences between the original. I think it was Gig actually, not Mego, who released the original Red Falcon toy, because even that's quite sought after and quite hard to find. So it's great that, well, for me anyway, that Palisades did release this version, because you can pick these guys up a lot cheaper on eBay, and they do still turn up from time to time, the different variations. I know some people, you know, collect all the different variations, and I am still looking out for the original. I think that would be cool to have that as well. But I do love this. Now you can just see some kind of clear kind of rubber bands here, and that's because the fists do fire, like on the original Kotatsu Jig toy. But on this version, that is one of the QC issues. For some reason, those fists don't want to stay in, they just want to keep firing. So I've just added this kind of rubber band there just to kind of keep them in place so I don't lose them. Because I must admit, all the firing systems on these things are very sensitive, as you saw with the head a moment ago. And you can see here, I've just taken out that little missile because it just always wants to fire. And the firing mechanism is pretty cool. So, moving back to Palisades Red Falcon, the red and black version that we've got here. So let's have a look at the articulation. So you can see the articulation is really, really good here. Although you can't put out the arm too far, because as you do, you can see then it releases that mechanism. So you haven't got a huge amount of articulation that way. With the legs, you can kind of rotate the legs around, but again, if you pull the legs away, you're going to release the leg from its magnet. It has got a knee hinge there, although again, do be careful, because those legs do come unhinged quite easily. What else have we got? We haven't got a waist swivel on these ones. The head, because it's just this kind of magnetic kind of ball joint, will obviously rotate all the way around. You can get some movement up and down, which is quite nice. So he's looking quite cool there as he's looking down, which is very good. The wings you can remove from the back here, and actually if I just pull off his arms, just moving them out of the way for a moment, because you've got another magnetic ball joint here, we could pop them in place, and you can just get this kind of winged version without the arms. Although with that, because of the weight of the arms, they do kind of want to drop down sometimes. In fact, that's holding up quite well. There we go, that one's dropping a little bit, look. So that is one of the issues with particularly the Titans, the Micronaut Titans, is that the ball joints, because it's a ball joint, it wants to slide. You know, there's nothing stopping it from moving. And you get that even with the legs sometimes. Well, that's not too bad there. So you can't get the character into dynamic poses because you can only lift up the legs so far. So you can't get very dynamic poses, and there's no kind of ankle tilt. Don't forget, this is an old mold. It's an old toy from the 70s and the 80s. But articulation is pretty good, really, for what it is. For me, though, it just looks really cool. And even though we have issues with the arms, you know, wanting to come off. Wrong one. Put that on over. There you go. But the arms wanting to kind of release as you move it. Of course, the gimmick was that you could pull the arm off, and if you got another one of these Titans, you can replace it with another one. And that is one of the things that I love about this, is that you can just kind of mix them around. In fact, let's just take off the Falcon's head and put Steel Jeeg in place, which looks pretty cool. And then we can put on Red Falcon onto Jeeg's body, which matches actually quite well. And of course, do you know what? Let's go to the Hurricane Bird toy. Let's put those on. How cool does that look? That looks awesome. You know, so at the end of this kind of line, you know, it's spanned generations, you know, 4 decades. This line has been going, and it's got a loyal fan base, but also in many ways it's kind of been problematic. It hasn't always kind of done as well as what it could do at times, which is a shame, you know. So, you know, to see the different variations of these, like the Hurricane Bird that I showed you earlier, which is from the 90s, but how you can kind of mix that with some of the older versions, I just think is brilliant. And it just means you can just keep adding and adding to this collection, and that gives you lots more, you know, a lot more options, more things that you can do with this. So I'm just going to show you how to put this back into the bird mode. So let me get the pieces back. But if, like me, you hadn't really seen many of these toys, I'm hoping that this review would at least draw your attention to it. And you might want to look into this toy line with a bit more detail, because there's lots of stuff out there to find out about these. So once you've got your figure, you pull off the wings, okay, like we've already done here. We're then going to remove the arms and the legs. So we've just got the head and the torso. So we're just going to move all of that other stuff out to one side. We've got the main part of the bird here, and we've attached these kind of legs, which got wheels on the bottom, yeah, to the 2 pegs there. I don't want to push them in too much, just because although this line doesn't have the QC issues that the earlier lines did with the Palisade re-releases, it's still clear plastic, so I'm just being reasonably careful with that. So I'm now going to push the head into here. So you want the pegs on the back, look, to be at the bottom. So I'm just pushing that in. Now that won't hold in place by itself. So to hold that in place, we need to put the wings on. So in fact, I'm just going to pull that back out. And I think if I put the wings in first, that will then help. So you can see there's this little kind of hole there, and that's on a hinge. And there's a peg on the wings here. So I'm just going to push that into that hole. So let's just, there we go. Give that a bit of a twist. Put the missiles back in place. There we go. So that's pushed into that peg there. Do the same with the other side. And just give that a twist. And then we've got the two magnetic balls which will hold in the torso. So let's push that in there. And then we can push those two in place. You will go in. There we go. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So now, I'll just line that up a bit more. We can take the back section, which has got this other weapon here, which is kind of like some big kind of space gun type thing. I don't think it's meant to be a sword. So that pegs in at the bottom of here, and we've got these two metallic parts here, they're not, which will kind of link into the magnetic joints on the bottom of the torso. So I'm just going to poke that through the legs there, turn that around, there we go, and that links in place there. So we've got the tail and the wings, and then all we need to do now is push the head in place, and now we have a kind of bird mode or vehicle mode from the Red Falcon. So in many ways he was kind of like an early kind of parts former or transformer in some ways, you could suggest. But it's interesting that, you know, Transformers come from Micro Change, which comes from the Microman line. So I do like the way these kind of all link in together, which is really cool. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this review of Red Falcon from Pallisades, from the Micronauts line. I hope you've enjoyed seeing a little bit of the rest of my collection, and I hope it inspires you to take a look at this line yourself, because I just think they are fantastic toys. Again, don't worry, I'm not going to become a reviewer. I don't think I'm the best at reviewing toys, but I just thought you might be interested in seeing something that I hadn't seen before, certainly not this version. And you may not have seen things like the Steel Jeeg either, which is again really cool, especially the clear version. So do stay tuned to the channel. I will be doing another diorama tutorial soon. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe, and I will see you soon.